Okay, my name is Shelly Francis, and I'm the director of the Indigenous Nursing Program here at the Faculty of Nursing UNB.
And my name is Brenda Hay, and I'm a senior instructor at Faculty of Nursing at UNB.
I'm the director of the Indigenous Nursing Program. The mandate of my program is to support Indigenous nursing students through the 4-year program here and also with the 2-year ASP program at the Moncton campus. As you know, the health outcomes of Indigenous people in this country can be challenging at times, and it's kind of a sad situation. So what this program aims to do is to increase the health human resources of Indigenous people so that there are more Indigenous healthcare providers delivering care to Indigenous people in their communities and in the urban areas. And that's sort of been the goal of this project for about 10 years now. And I just came into this role just this year. And I've sort of broadened my horizons in a sense that I'm working with the faculty more to help them to understand about Indigenous health issues, about the culture, for them to have experiential learning opportunities. So faculty members that will attend sweats with me and go to the powwows and try traditional foods, engage in smudging ceremonies, talking circles, those types of things. So also to, by helping the faculty and staff experience this, they're better prepared to understand the needs of Indigenous students. So they're more open to helping and supporting those Indigenous students as well. In addition to all of that, I've opened up my office to non-Indigenous students this year because the majority of our students here are non-Indigenous, and they also will have encounters with Indigenous people in their nursing careers. So it's important for them to understand the culture and the history of the oppression in the residential school, intergenerational trauma, the effects that came from that. So working with non-Indigenous students to help them understand is important too, because it builds more of a collaborative approach within the whole faculty. It seems like a more unified approach to helping the Indigenous health crisis in this country. So that's the majority of what I do.
I'm an instructor, both clinical and classroom instructor here in the nursing faculty. I take students in 3rd year to a clinical placement in an Indigenous community. So for me, I spent my whole nursing career working within Indigenous communities. So it was just like second nature for me to kind of move from a professional into a teaching role in that realm. And so I take students over to St. Mary's First Nations, and we have developed over the last 4 years a cultural immersion program, which allows students to learn not just about the health aspect of working with Indigenous people, but also how culture affects health. And how does that culture, if they understand the culture, then maybe when they have people in the hospital or they meet them in community, they'll have a better understanding how some of that plays out in the everyday lives of the people that they're working with. So sometimes that affects people going home for discharge planning, or whether that be their life in their home communities. Also, there's a whole different structure. There's 2 structures when it comes to health. There's the provincial national health structure, and then there's also the non-insured health benefits. So helping them understand how those 2 can work together to provide a better health delivery model for people is really important. The other aspect is that they also get to learn from elders, and learning from and including elders in the program is really important to me, because they have a way of helping the students to really understand some of the idiosyncrasies that they see, and that's kind of really important. So we have our resident elder up at the
MWC.
Thank you. Imelda, and she's our adopted elders, and we have an elder in the community, Maggie Paul, who's another one of our adopted elders. The students also get to experience things like the Redshaw Campaign, which is really important because it highlights some of the national programs or national concerns across the country. And it helps the students to really understand when they're sitting there reading these bios of all of the murdered and missing Aboriginal people in Canada, especially and women, they understand more about how that plays contextually with oppression and understanding some of the issues around, what's the word I want, Shelly?
Social justice
Thank
issues.
you. And how does that play out? So they spend 4 days. They're the keepers of the shawls. So they spend and they sit with the shawls, and it really is very. It's a deep learning. It's a almost the students that come into this program actually when they leave say that it has changed them.
Transformative.
Yeah, it really is. And they get to go to a sweat lodge. They make their own drum. They learn how to smudge. They are both in the school and in the health center. So they're not just in the hospital. They see the bigger context. They're in homes with families. So the cultural immersion piece of it, where they encompass both family, community, and institutional care is phenomenal. Very rarely in nursing do we get the luxury of pulling all three pieces together for our students.
That's true. Yeah.
So it really is, and
second to none. It's second to none.
And we've been really fortunate. We also have a partnership with the A&I program, which is really important because Shelly gets to help us inform students about all kinds of different traditional ways. We have another instructor over in Moncton, Cheyenne Joseph, who again has another 1135 course which allows students to learn about Indigenous health through a course. I developed a cultural module that all students in third years walks through, and it takes them through nomadicism straight through to
present day.
Yeah, present day 2018 through Davis Inlet. And the walking of the Mushwa Innu people, and it's done in a way where the Mushwa Innu people actually teach the students, and then we have an online discussion forum where the students get to talk about what they feel culture is, because a lot of students don't understand how culture impacts, and it helps to build allies. We want them to be good allies when they leave. We want them to, no matter what culture they come across. So this is just one culture, but the lessons that they learn walking through this can be applied to many.
So since I've come here at UMB, I've been asked to co-chair the TRC committee.
Yeah.
The TRC working group here at UMB has been around for a couple of years. It started off with the MWC and Dean Sherman, who's since passed away. But we're hoping to carry on her hard work and dedication in assuring that the TRC calls to action are addressed within UMB. So there's a team of almost 30 people, which is very humbling. I think it's wonderful that there's that many people in this institution that really want to make a difference. The TRC working group probably takes up about half of my time, and gladly so. What I hope to do through this channel is to advocate for students so that we are able to meet the TRC calls to action as they apply to education in UMB, and justice, social justice issues as well. So in doing this, I'm advocating for the nursing students here. I'm advocating for the broader Indigenous student population here at UMB by engaging with different sort of ideas and initiatives, such as, working towards building a physical space here. So we're having an Indigenous building here on campus, so that every faculty member and every student will do a territorial acknowledgement, acknowledging our space here within Wolastoqey territory, so that we have a culturally safe space in every faculty, so that Indigenous students will feel safe and comfortable in any faculty they choose to study in, so that will be offered traditional foods through Sodexo. So just different little things within the university that we can make a change. That's what we're doing with this TRC committee. So a lot of my work about half of it goes to helping to ensure that these conditions are met, that we're working towards our 10-point action plan, because the President will be releasing our TRC 10-point action plan, which is coming out this spring, around the same time as they hire an Indigenous lead position. So really great things are happening here at UNB. And once these positions are in place, I'll be able to sort of focus back on nursing again. Dean Pat Seaman here has been really just instrumental in allowing me to broaden my horizons and to expand with a need that had to be sort of taken up right away. Because Ann Sherman had passed this summer, there was sort of a void where things were not really moving forward. So I sort of stepped in and helped out where I could. And then I'll step back when the lead comes into the scene.
Well, I think our program can't go without the collaboration of our community. We're at St. Mary's. We work very hard with the principal, Alison Brooks. We're at the health center with the nurses there. We work within the community with our local elders. We have tradespeople that come in to teach our students to bead. We partner with Amalda Purley to be on here. We're working constantly with different groups like the Redshaw Campaign. So we partner with a lot of people, and that's the only way we can be successful, because we could not do it on our own. So the involvement of the community is, I would say, at least 75% of what my program is. It's 75% and 25% the Faculty of Nursing, because most of it comes from the community.
You need to have experiential learning. That's key. That's the way that our people teach each other. That's where elders have taught us. That's how we learn the language. That's how we learn how to survive, was through experiential learning. So if we can offer that type of learning to any one of our students, not just Indigenous students, but any one of our students, we'd have a much more wholesome, robust program, because not only would our students be able to be reconnected, sometimes when they come here they're disconnected from their culture and their communities, so they would reconnect with their communities and also have a sense of pride about what they're doing and what they know. So experiential learning is key, and that's why Brenda's program is very successful, because all of those students are hands-on. They learn how to make Indian bread. They make their own drum. So I've never made my own drum before. And some of these students are doing incredible things. They're working hands-on with critical pieces like the Redshaw Campaign, where they're interacting with family members of women who were murdered. Like, that's heavy-duty stuff that they're getting to experience. So that experiential learning piece is incredible. This term, I co-taught with Cheyenne on Nursing 1324, which is Indigenous Perspectives on Health and Wellness. And sadly, there was a disconnect in the course because we were trying to, because there's so few Indigenous scholars out there, we were trying to connect between Moncton, St. John, and Fredericton. So we did it through video conferencing, which, for the students who weren't in our physical space, it was a challenge for them. And even though I did go to St. John a couple times, so did Cheyenne, we tried to be present. There was no comparison to having that class in front of you, so they could touch the drums and they could, but we could all go to a sweat together. So there was all kinds of challenges that we couldn't do as a group. So that lends me to the notion, I guess it further supports my notion about the hands-on experiential learning is so important. You can't describe to somebody what a sweat's going to feel like. No. You just have to go do it. That's right. You can't, even in making Indian bread, you could give somebody the recipe, but they have to actually do it. And even then, sometimes it doesn't work out exactly. I'm a case in point for that. So just that hands-on, and the biggest bonus here is that we have 3 awesome communities who really want to partner with us. If it wasn't for St. Mary's, Kingsclear, and Ormocto, we wouldn't have those opportunities to learn because the other communities are just so far away. So what we have seen, and Brenda has seen, is everybody wants to take her clinical group now. Everybody wants that experience because they do. In the middle of it, they're like, oh my God, I can't take another day of this. But after it, they're like, oh, I'm ever glad I did that. It was so awesome. So there's more students that want to take it. So what we need to do now is work on the challenge of broadening those experiences. So getting an instructor in Kingsclear, getting one in Oromocto, because only St. Mary's right now is being utilized for clinical experience. So, yeah.
And I think flipping the narrative, allowing Indigenous people to tell their stories and to bring that live, rich education into the classroom by allowing them to be the experts.
Yes.
And helping our students to hear those stories. Because when you can make something come alive, when the students listen to the people from Natwashish talk about what it was like to move from a nomadic life into a community and how much they lost, it really sets them back. It's not like me saying or giving them something to read out of a textbook or handing them something to, or for me to sit there and lecture to them. When an Indigenous people are standing there in front of them and they have that story to tell, it brings a richness that nothing compares
Absolutely.
to. So I think having that as part of our program is huge.
Yeah.
And the students, even if they can't come to the classroom, if I can find video, if I can find documentaries, if I can find ways to share those stories and let the people tell them the story and then use that as a jumping point to then have the discussion and have the talking circle, it's just a full-on experience.
Yeah. And the other thing that we do so every third year student gets a clinical placement in the community. So Brenda teaches third year, and her clinical group goes to the St. Mary's First Nation. Other students go to like different schools or the addiction center. But what we do offer for all the students, so 54 students in that third year, and every third year student gets a full day cultural orientation. So at the beginning in September, we take the students to St. Mary's, and I organize a cultural day. So 54 students come with their instructors, and we set them up for a whole day of education. So they'll do things like they'll hear about the history, because a lot of students when they come to university don't even know the true history of what happened. They're like, residential schools, what happened? What do you mean? You know, and I'm just shocked that they don't know, but it's the reality. So we talk to them about the residential school, the history of the oppression and marginalization of our people, all of that stuff. We talk about the TRC, and we also bring in guest speakers and storytellers. This year, we're blessed to have Percy Sakobi. I don't know if you've ever heard of Percy Sakobi.
Oh my gosh.
He's recently won the Lieutenant Governor General Award.
Okay.
He and Imelda, our elder, received their awards this past fall in Ottawa. Percy, his father, and I think his mother too, attended residential school, and he has had 4 siblings, all of whom committed suicide. So he's the last surviving member of his family. Yet he takes it upon himself to heal others. And so what he did was he built Percy's our lodge, not a sweat lodge, Percy's Lodge in St. Mary's First Nation, in collaboration with like the Fredericton Police Force, the firefighters, the military. He actually reached out to all people suffering from PTSD.
It's amazing.
And said, you can come here anytime. If you want to sweat, we'll do a sweat. If you want to come here, it's open 24 hours a day. You can come and sleep if you need a place to get away from a stressor that's bothering you or whatever. So despite finding 3 out of 4 of his siblings he actually found when they committed suicide.
It's just
I don't know where he gets the strength from. I know he still has struggles, I'm sure, with his own, demons. But he is such a remarkable force. We're so blessed to have him. So Percy is who actually helps us to do our sweats and our experiences with the people.
And the Healing Lodge is just such an incredible place to go. And the students walk away from being in that sweat and then having that feast and taking the time to, and he takes the time to talk to our students.
And for them to hear his story. There wasn't a dry eye.
No, and
that's what we tell them. When they come, they hear Percy's story. And I don't know if anybody who has white privilege could ever hear some of the things that our people have gone through, It's really, so to have him there to experience that, and then to talk about the joy part, the joyous parts of our culture, the beautiful parts, the parts about sharing and caring and how we help each other regardless. Those are the wonderful things that we bring to them. So they get to see the spin-off of the intergenerational trauma, but we also highlight the positive because there's so many strengths in our culture, and sometimes it's those strengths that gets us through hard times.
So there's another really good example of that, flipping the narrative, allowing people to tell their own stories.
Yes.
And I think that is remarkable. We also, along with that, then all students take the cultural module in 3065 class that I designed to help students to journey with a whole community. And this community has suffered some horrific stuff. And the video and the documentaries that have been saved from 1926 and on allow the students to move with the people as they go from being out on the land as nomadic people to in a community, and what happens when you impose somebody else's culture on somebody, and then from there on to through the alcoholism, the violence, and then into a brand new community where they are now. And they talk about, where is the hope? Where do you find hope when there seems to be? And that's another thing the students leave with. You have to help people find hope. You have to help people realize that even under Percy's, all his stuff, he still has hope. And that if you can install or bring hope to people within their lives and within health, then you give them a reason to overcome some very horrific things and move on.
Indigenous education, to me, again, needs to encompass experiential learning. It needs to come from our elders. So we need to have like a line, comes from the top, because that's how we respect knowledge, because we know that our elders are knowledge keepers, and they the information that they give us comes from the heart, and it's not ever meant to hurt us, so we can trust in it, and we know it to be true. So that's how I think it has to come from that way. Indigenous education needs to be in a place that's safe, that's culturally safe. So, and it has to be, if it can't be done by an Indigenous person, it has to be done from a strong Indigenous ally. So somebody like Brenda. Brenda's lived in the community. She's worked in the community. She's lived on the land with them. So somebody who has that life experience, for me, is able to do the best job they can if you don't have an Indigenous person around. But you really need to have somebody who's an ally. Otherwise they wouldn't understand.
Yeah, and I think Indigenous education has to encompass what is important to Indigenous people. It doesn't need to come from a place of other people telling people what Indigenous education should be. So I think we need, the more we have those conversations and the more that we involve everybody, I don't know if I could classify what exactly Indigenous education needs to be, because I'm not the person to classify it. So I think it needs to come from big conversations within the Indigenous communities to decide what does that mean. And to have an Indigenous education, does that mean that it has to be solely Indigenous, or is that a combination of different places and different things? And if you're in a professional program, such as yourself in law or Shelly in nursing, what does that mean within an Indigenous education? Because there are parameters that you have to complete in order to become a lawyer or become a nurse. But does that mean that it has to be without the context in which elders are brought in and things are vetted through a cultural lens? I don't know. I know that it's a struggle when it doesn't make sense. And I think having the wrong people teach it causes major issues. And so helping people to look at the TRC recommendations and then look at what is currently in our Allied Bill of Health or Allied Bill of Rights and the Indigenous people's rights, And coming through all of those places, finding the right person, the right course, the right amount of connection between community and Indigenous leaders, I think then you'll find that answer. You know, in the next 10 years, I will retire. And I would hope that within that time frame, just within our own faculty, that we would be in all Indigenous communities, that we would have a robust courses that students can take as electives versus play a flute. Maybe, really, seriously.
Yeah.
Like playing 10-13 or whatever.
Whatever, you know, instead of it's something that is meaningful in Indigenous health, that there'd be courses that if a student chooses, they can inform themselves, even in law, that there would be more scholars that are out there that are helping us to design and to understand. That, I think, is where we're in the next 10 years, that the TRC recommendations will be here at the forefront of our discussions, not as a side to a discussion, that they are there at the front of the discussion and they inform everything. And I think if we can do that, then I think Indigenous education has a really hopeful future.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it would take longer than 10 years, but in the 10 years,
if we can just get that far into the next before I leave.
And so much has happened in the last 6 months.
6 months, yes.
Like since I started here, this university has just expanded in terms of its recognition and respect and willingness to partner with Indigenous people. It's phenomenal. So in 10 years from now, I see Indigenous education as having Indigenous scholars teaching Indigenous content, not necessarily teaching nursing in the community or other generic courses in nursing or law. I see Indigenous people teaching Indigenous content. I see Indigenous people on the Board of Governors, in the Senate, within the faculties, as a vice president. Like I see Indigenous people at a higher level in terms of the governance of the university, so they will have a voice. I see in the high school system there needs to be the truth needs to be told in history classes, so that when these students come to us from high school, they're very well informed. So we don't have to go back to Indigenous 101 to teach them what really happened, because right now that's what we're doing. We're having to repair their lack of knowledge. So when they come here, then they have to start unpacking their own white privilege, figuring out where they stand in the scheme of things. So I envision in 10 years when the students come to university, they're going to have already been done. That'll be done because they'll have had that in high school. I'll also can envision just increased numbers of graduates, so that when we have a graduation ceremony, there won't be just a few Indigenous graduates. There's going to be a whole bunch of Indigenous students. I see being able to get an Indigenous minor and major, or be able to minor and major in Indigenous studies here, which there's not enough courses to do that now.
You have to go up to St. Thomas.
Exactly.
From my understanding.
Yeah. So if you can get more Indigenous scholars, you can you're able to do that. And of course, in 10 years' time, I really believe that we're going to have a physical space here at UNB. So in 10 years' time, that physical space will be able to provide a lot of Indigenous students with support, goals, a future, because because that's their place.
And I would hope in 10 years from now that the bigger picture gets taken care of, that funding down from the federal government down to our schools are on par, that the students, like right now, the funding for Indigenous schools is lesser than if they send a student out to a provincial school, that comes up, that schools in our First Nations communities, that students can choose to stay in their home communities and be educated. So I think that piece, the bigger national piece on education, I would hope within the next 10 years that they would have a bigger discussion about what needs to be on the table in the next 10 years. Because right now that discussion's not that's not happening. Paul Martin started it 4 years ago, and then it's kind of died at the wayside. He came and we all listened, and it kind of came and it went. So if we can educate the children that are coming through the system, so that when they come to university, their educational standards are there so that they can find their way through, would be wonderful. Because not just here, but I see it in the north, the educational standards for students coming out of the north, and then they come down, and so their success rate at university is far lower because their preparation wasn't as great. So if that can happen, then Indigenous education at a secondary school level, and then will help allow that bridge to occur much easier for students entering into post-secondary or into the college system. You know, because we need people to be able to move from one system to the other, and right now there's a big disconnect.
I'd like to see more research done.
More research.
Yeah. So when I'm, contemplating implementing a program, for example, I need to know that this is successful in other places, that this is, proven to work with Indigenous students.
Yes.
So this type of support, this type of opportunity. I'd also like to know the research on experiential learning in Indigenous communities. So for me, research is important because that's how we teach. It's got to be evidence-based, right? So for me, that would be huge, is to have that research.
When I went starting to look for research around clinical immersion models, it's not there.
Not much.
Yeah.
So, and helping people that are currently working in those areas to feel more comfortable to articulate what they're doing. Because I think sometimes there's some really good stuff going on all across Canada, and there's no database to collect all of that stuff, so you can say, well, I wonder what they're doing.
There's neat stuff within the university here that I'm like, oh my gosh, I didn't have the app, the language app. I'm like, oh my gosh, everybody should know about this. How come people don't know about this? So sometimes within our own circles, there's a lack of communication, and it's nobody's fault. It's just sort of sometimes we get stuck in our little silos.
Kind of an Indigenous library, online library that captures things like the Allied Bill of Rights.
Yes.
You would think that would be in a law school.